Her act of compassion, a solitary ripple in the vast, unforgiving expanse, would return to her cabin with the dawn, not as a whisper of gratitude, but as a silent encirclement of shadows. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. Ilara had long ago made peace with the silence, the kind that swallows sound whole, leaving only the relentless thrum of one's own heart in its wake. Her cabin, a rough-hewn sentinel against the encroaching wilderness, stood as a monument to a life stripped bare, a deliberate exile from a world that had once judged her too harshly. The sun, a brutal eye in the azure sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the parched earth, baking the air until it shimmered with unseen heat. Every breath was a dry rasp, every movement a protest from muscles tightened by endless vigilance. This was her existence, a solitary ballet of survival, where humanity was a luxury she rarely afforded, least of all to herself. Yet, when she stumbled upon him, a stark silhouette against the dying light, something within her fractured. He lay tangled in the tall prairie grass, a dark, motionless mass, his skin a deeper shade of night against the crimson seep of his wound. An Apache, a black man. Two truths that, in her isolated corner of the world, screamed danger and prejudice in equal measure. The rifle in her hands felt impossibly heavy, a familiar weight suddenly imbued with a moral burden she hadn't asked for. Her first instinct, honed by years of distrust and the brutal lessons of the frontier, was to turn, to leave him to the mercy of the vultures already circling unseen in the thermal currents. But his eyes, even in the dimming light, held a raw, primal glint, not of hostility, but of a shared, desperate vulnerability. A single, ragged breath escaped his lips, a sound that bypassed her fear and lodged itself in a forgotten corner of her soul. He was a man, dying, in a place where death came easily. The canteen at her hip, its canvas damp with the precious liquid it held, suddenly felt like a lead weight. Her fingers, calloused and rough, fumbled with the clasp. Each drop she poured onto his cracked lips felt like a transgression against every unwritten law of her solitary existence, every ingrained fear whispered by a prejudiced society. He drank, slow and agonizing, his gaze never leaving hers, a silent pact forged in the crucible of his pain and her reluctant mercy. Then, as abruptly as he had appeared, he was gone, melted back into the inky blackness of the night, leaving only the unsettling echo of his presence and the chilling emptiness of the canteen. Ilara stood there, the cool metal, a stark contrast to the burning confusion in her mind, knowing that her act of kindness, born of a fleeting, unwelcome empathy, might just be the very thing that sealed her fate. The silence that followed was no longer comforting, but a suffocating shroud, promising a reckoning with the dawn. The night became a predator, each rustle of the wind a whispered threat, each distant howl a mournful lament for a life already forfeit. Ilara tossed on her makeshift bed, the rough wool of the blanket doing little to soothe the frantic pounding of her heart. She saw his eyes again, the depths of them holding a flicker of something she couldn't name, something beyond the pain, beyond the immediate danger. Had she been a fool? Had her humanity, a relic she thought long buried beneath layers of hardened cynicism, betrayed her? Society had taught her to fear, to despise, to see difference as a weapon, and she had, for so long, clung to those doctrines as a shield. Yet tonight that shield felt flimsy, riddled with holes. The image of his wounded form, so starkly vulnerable, refused to recede. What did a moment of kindness truly mean in a world built on cruelty? Was it a weakness, or a silent, radical act of defiance? The cabin, usually her fortress, now felt like a fragile shell, transparent to the unseen eyes she imagined lurking just beyond the perimeter of her meager firelight. Every creak of the aging timbers, every whisper of the dry prairie grass against the window, sounded like an approaching footstep, a silent confirmation of her burgeoning dread. She had heard tales, whispers on the wind from passing travelers, of the Apache, of their cunning, their ferocity, their unforgiving nature. And the Black Apache, a rare, almost mythical figure in the stories, was said to carry a double burden, a double fire. Her hands, clenching and unclenching in the darkness, remembered the sensation of the rough canteen, the warm, wet feel of his lips. It was a fleeting, almost forgotten memory. A child's hand slipping from hers in a crowded street. The sudden, sharp panic of loss. You let go, Ilara. You always let go. Asterisk, the thought, unbidden and cold, was a ghost from a past she had fled. A memory of a choice made, a life sacrificed, and the quiet, crushing judgment that followed. It was this same judgment that had driven her to this desolate cabin, to this life of self-imposed solitude. She had sought a wilderness where she wouldn't be seen, wouldn't be judged, wouldn't be found. But now, it seemed, the wilderness itself had come to judge her. The distant hoot of an owl, usually a familiar comfort, now felt like a premonition, a chilling pronouncement of inevitable doom. She rose, moving to the small, grimy window, peering out into the impenetrable darkness. Nothing. Yet, the air was thick with expectation, a tangible presence she could almost taste. The silence outside was no longer empty. It was pregnant with unspoken purpose. It felt like holding one's breath before a plunge into icy water. And then, as the first sliver of bruised purple light bled across the eastern horizon, painting the sky with the hues of dawn, she saw them, not one, but many. Silent, still figures, a silent ring of watchful sentinels, their horses merging with the shadows of the rising sun. They surrounded her cabin, the air caught in her throat, a scream trapped before it could find its way out. Her act of compassion had returned, not as a whisper, but as a chilling, inescapable embrace. The dawn, typically a herald of renewal, now draped the world in a cruel, mocking light. Each ray that pierced the gloom illuminated another stoic figure, another silent, painted face, until the entire perimeter of her small, vulnerable cabin was ringed by an unyielding barrier of human forms and horseflesh. They were statues carved from the very stone of the earth, unmoving, their gazes like polished obsidian, reflecting nothing but the stark, unwavering resolve that seemed to emanate from them. Their horses, their breath pluming in the crisp morning air, stood with an almost unnatural stillness, as if they too were holding their breath, waiting for a signal. Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a primal fear that bypassed thought and went straight to the instinct of flight. But there was nowhere to flee. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat, a gasp that remained unheard in the overwhelming silence. She saw him then, the warrior from the previous night, his form no longer weakened by injury, but standing tall, his back to the rising sun, his shadow stretching long and menacing towards her door. His eyes, the same ones that had held a plea for water, now held an unreadable intensity, a depth that defied easy interpretation. He was no longer just a wounded man. He was a leader, a figure of formidable authority among his brethren. The irony, a bitter taste on her tongue, was a cruel twist of the knife. Her compassion, a rare and fleeting surrender to a forgotten part of herself, had led her directly into this snare. It was the ultimate betrayal of her own hardened principles, a consequence she had never truly anticipated. Asterisk. A kindness given is a debt incurred. Asterisk. An old settler had once grumbled, his words now echoing in her mind, a prophetic warning she had foolishly ignored. The rifle, still clutched in her trembling hands, felt utterly useless against such numbers, against such an unyielding, unified presence. What did they want? There was no demand, no shout, no threatening gesture, only this suffocating silence, a palpable weight that pressed down on her, demanding answers she didn't possess. The world outside her window seemed to shrink, reduced to the confines of this tense tableau, where every shadow held a hidden warrior, every glint of metal a potential threat. The air was thin, charged with unspoken questions. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape its cage. She scanned their faces, searching for any flicker of emotion, any hint of their intentions, but found only the same impassive masks, carved from stone and ancient pride. The sun climbed higher, painting the eastern sky with bolder strokes of gold and crimson. Yet the coldness in the air, the coldness in her soul, persisted. It was a coldness that spoke of death, of judgment, of an impending reckoning. The warrior she had helped, his gaze fixed on her, became a mirror, reflecting her own fear, her own uncertainty. A silent question mark suspended in the tense morning light. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. This was not a moment for weakness. This was a moment for survival. The world outside her window, once her sanctuary, now felt like a stage, and she, an unwilling performer, caught in a drama she did not understand, yet knew, with chilling certainty, was entirely of her own making. The waiting was the worst, a slow torture of the spirit, a relentless grinding down of hope. The silence stretched, thin and brittle, threatening to snap at any moment. Alara's mind, usually a fortress of pragmatism, began to unravel, pulling at the threads of memory, searching for an anchor, a reason, a way out. She had built this cabin with her own hands, brick by painful brick, each splinter a reminder of the life she'd left behind, a life she'd had to abandon. The scent of pine and dust, usually a comforting scent, now seemed to mock her, conjuring images of a different wood, a different scent, a different betrayal. Asterisk. You stained our name, Alara. Asterisk. Her father's voice, a gravelly pronouncement, echoed from the deepest recesses of her mind. His words, etched onto her soul, were as sharp and unforgiving as the mountain winds that had once whipped around their family homestead. The memory was a vivid tableau. The accusations, the whispers, the averted gazes of the townsfolk. She had been accused of theft, not of gold or silver, but of truth, of an untruth. A lie, born of desperation, had coiled around her, suffocating her reputation, her future. She had tried to explain, to defend herself, but the verdict was already sealed in the collective judgment of a small, righteous community. She saw again the narrow, unforgiving eyes of Mrs. Gable, the self-appointed moral compass of their village. Her lips pursed in perpetual disapproval. And Sheriff Brody, his badge glinting like a mocking star, his words delivered with a chilling finality. Asterisk. There's no place for your kind of trouble here, Alara. Asterisk. Her kind of trouble was simply the inconvenient truth she carried, a truth that exposed the hypocrisy of others, making her the convenient scapegoat. So she had packed her meager belongings, leaving behind the only life she had ever known, the coldness of her father's gaze, a permanent brand upon her spirit. The journey west had been a crucible of hardship, stripping away any lingering illusions of societal benevolence. She had learned to trust no one, to depend only on her own wits and the cold, hard steel of her rifle. Every sunrise since had been a reaffirmation of her self-reliance, a silent promise to herself that she would never again be vulnerable, never again be subject to the whims of others' judgment. This cabin was her defiant statement, a monument to a resilience forged in the fires of abandonment and accusation. It was a place where she could finally be free, not just from the rules of society, but from its judging eyes. Yet, here they were, a new set of judging eyes, silent and inscrutable, surrounding her in this very sanctuary. The irony was a cruel twist of fate. She had fled one kind of judgment, only to find herself trapped by another, perhaps more primal, more ancient one. Her past, a constant nagging wound, now bled into her present, informing every racing thought, every frantic beat of her heart. She wondered if the Apache, too, carried their own burdens of judgment, their own scars from a world that sought to contain them. A fleeting thought. Was her act of kindness born of a deeper understanding of being an outsider, a shared resonance with the wounded warrior? Or was it simply a foolish aberration, a fatal lapse in her carefully constructed armor? The silence outside deepened, broken only by the rhythmic thrumming of her own fear, a prelude to an unknown reckoning. The standoff continued, a tableau frozen in time, the air crackling with an unspoken energy. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that belied the raw power of his presence, the warrior she had helped, the leader, stepped forward. His movements were fluid, precise, like a predator assessing its prey. Yet there was no overt aggression in his posture, no raised weapon, no battle cry. His eyes, dark pools reflecting the morning sun, were fixed on her, an intensity that seemed to pierce through the rough glass of her window into the very core of her being. He raised a hand, not in threat, but in a gesture that was both commanding and enigmatic. It was an invitation, perhaps, or a demand. His lips moved, but no sound reached her, only the faint shimmer of the dry air distorting his unspoken words. What did he want? Her mind raced, a flurry of desperate questions without answers. Was this a prelude to violence? A test? A peculiar form of gratitude? The weight of their collective gaze pressed down on her. Each silent warrior a silent question mark, their patience unnerving. Ilara gripped her rifle tighter, the cold steel a thin comfort against the rising tide of panic. Her throat was parched, her tongue heavy. She wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to break the suffocating silence with a desperate plea for understanding. But she knew, instinctively, that any such outburst would be a mistake, a display of weakness they would likely exploit. This was not a moment for words, but for reading the unwritten, for deciphering the subtle cues of a culture she barely understood. The sun, climbing higher, began to warm the cabin, but the chill in her heart remained. She thought of her meager belongings, the few provisions that sustained her, the small store of coins hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Were they here for plunder, for revenge? Or was it something else entirely? Something she, a woman of the white world, could not possibly comprehend. The warrior leader took another step, his shadow lengthening, eclipsing the thin strip of sunlight that had managed to penetrate the cabin. He paused, his gaze unwavering, then pointed, with a deliberate, slow movement, towards the earth beneath her feet. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of ages, an unspoken demand for something fundamental, something ancient. Her mind struggled to grasp its meaning. Was he claiming the land? Was this a symbolic gesture of ownership, of territory reclaimed? The possibilities spun in her head, each more terrifying than the last. Her internal monologue was a torrent of rhetorical questions, each one unanswered, each one amplifying the gnawing uncertainty. Why this silence? Why this patient, terrifying stillness? What debt did I unknowingly incur with a simple drink of water? The air thrummed with the unspoken. It was a language she did not speak, a story she could not read, a test she feared she was already failing. The image of his hand, pointing to the ground, became a potent symbol, an open loop of suspense that stretched the moment into an eternity. Her life, suspended between a past she had fled and a future she could not foresee, hung by the slender thread of this terrifying, silent confrontation. The obsidian stone lay still in the dust, a silent, potent question. Its dark, reflective surface seemed to draw Elara's gaze, pulling her back as if by an unseen thread to another time, another place, where another stone had marked a turning point. Then, with a subtle shift, he lowered his hand and reached into a leather pouch at his side. Her heart leaped, a wild, panicked flutter. Was this it? A weapon? A hidden blade? But what he withdrew was not an instrument of war, but a small, intricately carved stone, smooth and dark, reflecting the morning light. It was a piece of obsidian, polished to a mirror's sheen, no larger than her thumb, yet its presence seemed to fill the silent, tense air. He held it out, not towards her directly, but towards the ground between them, as if offering it to the earth itself. Then, with a deliberate motion, he knelt, placing the stone carefully in the dust. Around him, his warriors remained still, their eyes tracking her every reaction, each a silent, unwavering judge. The mystery deepened, unfolding in slow, agonizing increments. This was not the expected violence, not the desperate confrontation she had braced herself for. This was something else, something ritualistic, something she felt she was meant to understand, yet remained utterly lost in its symbolism. Her mind raced, trying to find a parallel, a memory, any thread of knowledge that could untangle this knot of suspense. The stone, what did it signify? A treaty? A warning? A marker of passage? She recalled snippets of folklore, distorted tales from wandering trappers, of native rituals, of their deep connection to the land. Was this a challenge to her claim on this patch of earth? Was it a demand for departure? She looked from the stone to the warrior leader's face, searching for a clue, a flicker of explanation in his unreadable eyes. There was only a profound, silent scrutiny, a heavy weight of observation that made her feel exposed, vulnerable to their ancient, unwavering gaze. It was as if they were stripping away her layers, peeling back her history, seeking a truth hidden beneath her fear and her defiance. The repetition of his unyielding stare, the silent circle of warriors, intensified the feeling of being trapped in an elaborate, silent play where she alone did not know her lines. The sun, now a brilliant orb in the sky, seemed to amplify the tension, casting sharp, defined shadows that mirrored the stark division between her world and theirs. The air was thick with the weight of generations, with the unspoken conflicts and misunderstandings that had scarred this land. The small obsidian stone, dark and smooth, became a powerful symbol, a microcosm of the vast, cultural chasm that lay between them. It pulsed with a quiet energy, a silent question posed directly to her soul. She felt an overwhelming sense of irony. Her act of kindness had brought her face to face not with gratitude, but with an ancient, profound test of her spirit. A silent interrogation she was utterly unprepared for. The open loop of the situation stretched, pulling her deeper into an understanding she desperately needed to grasp, but was terrifyingly close to failing. The obsidian stone lay still in the dust, a silent, potent question. Its dark, reflective surface seemed to draw Alara's gaze, pulling her back, as if by an unseen thread, to another time, another place, where another stone had marked a turning point. It was late autumn, years ago, in a dusty Kansas town, the wind carrying the first bite of winter. She remembered the market square, bustling with a false sense of prosperity, a veneer over the simmering tensions. She had been a young woman then, barely out of her teens, brimming with a naive optimism that had long since been weathered away. Her younger sister, Lily, a sprite of a girl with laughter in her eyes, had wandered off, chasing a stray dog near the edges of the square. Alara's heart seized in her chest at the memory, the sharp, cold fear of that moment, a premonition of loss. She had found Lily moments later, not playing, but cowering behind a stack of barrels, her face streaked with tears. A group of men, burly and loud, were jeering at a small family, a black man, a woman, and their young child, who were trying to sell their meager wares. Words, ugly and venomous, were flung like stones. "Go back where you came from. This land ain't for your kind." Lily, small and frightened, had witnessed the raw, unbridled hatred, the kind that twisted faces into grotesque masks. Alara had tried to comfort her, pulling her close, but the scene had seared itself into her own mind, a burning brand of injustice. She remembered the black man's eyes, filled with a quiet dignity, yet haunted by a familiar sorrow, a weary resignation to the cruelty of the world. It was the same look, she now realized with a chilling certainty, that she had seen in the wounded Apache's eyes, moments before he had drifted into the shadows. That day, something in Alara had hardened, a protective shell forming around her tender heart. She had seen the raw, unthinking prejudice that festered beneath the polite veneer of society. She had witnessed the ease with which people dehumanized others, the swiftness of their judgment, the casual cruelty that could break a spirit. It was a stark lesson, reinforcing the one she had learned from her own accusations, her own exile. Asterisk. They will always find someone to blame, Alara. Asterisk. Her grandmother, long since gone, had whispered in her dying days. Someone different. Someone inconvenient. Asterisk. The memory had resonated with her deeply, feeding her self-reliance, yes, but also nurturing a quiet, defiant empathy for the outcast, for those branded as different. It explained, perhaps, the flicker of compassion that had made her offer water to the wounded warrior, a subconscious recognition of a shared burden of being an outsider, an object of fear and prejudice. Back in the present, the obsidian stone in the dust seemed to pulse, its blackness absorbing the harsh morning light. The warrior leader, still kneeling, his gaze unwavering, seemed to be waiting for her to see, to remember, to understand. The tension, once a suffocating weight of fear, was now interwoven with a new thread, a profound, almost painful understanding of the parallels between her own past and the silent, historical drama unfolding before her. The stereotypes of the savage and the other dissolved, replaced by a deeper, more human truth. The air, thick with unspoken meaning, tightened its grip around Alara. The obsidian stone lay like a forgotten promise in the dust, a silent challenge that demanded not a spoken answer, but an intuitive understanding. The warrior leader, his silhouette framed against the relentless sun, rose slowly, his movements deliberate, every muscle coiled with a quiet power. He did not speak, but his gaze, direct and piercing, was a voice in itself, demanding a reckoning. He then extended his hand, palm open, towards her, not in a gesture of peace or aggression, but as an offering, a silent proposition. In his hand, resting on his palm, was a single, dried feather, vibrant with the colors of a hawk's wing. It was a stark contrast to the dark stone, fragile yet brimming with an unspoken significance. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and burgeoning comprehension, darted from the feather to his face, then to the unmoving circle of his warriors. This was not a fight. This was a test of trust, a challenge to her perception, a demand to bridge the chasm of fear and prejudice that separated their worlds. The feather was a symbol, she knew, of many things in their culture: courage, wisdom, freedom, spiritual connection. But what was its specific meaning now, in this tense, silent moment? Was it an offering of peace, or a dare to accept a burden she could not bear? Her mind raced, a whirlwind of possibilities. To refuse, it would surely be an act of defiance, a rejection of their silent proposition. To accept it, however, would be a leap into the unknown, an affirmation of a connection she barely understood, a commitment to a silent pact that could have unforeseen consequences. Her deeply flawed nature, honed by years of self-preservation and distrust, screamed at her to remain behind the safety of her cabin walls, to refuse this mysterious overture. Her past, filled with betrayals and misunderstandings, echoed a warning: trust no one, especially those who offer enigmatic gifts. Asterisk. Yet, the quiet dignity in his gaze, the unyielding patience of his warriors, spoke of a deeper purpose, a meaning far beyond a simple act of gratitude for water. It was a test of character, of her true nature, of whether she could see past the ingrained biases of her society, past the fear she had been taught. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic thrum of her own pulse in her ears, each beat a stark reminder of the gravity of the choice she was about to make. The memory of the wounded man, the raw vulnerability in his eyes as she had given him water, flooded her mind. It was that fleeting connection, that spark of shared humanity, that now presented itself as a profound, life-altering choice. The dramatic tension escalated, stretching thin as a bowstring, poised to snap. This was the pivotal moment, the emotional climax that had been building since his silent appearance. She was trapped between the perceived safety of her fear and the perilous possibility of an understanding, a connection that might either save her or destroy her. The feather, so delicate, held the weight of her entire world. The hawk feather, vibrant against the dark skin of the warrior's palm, seemed to shimmer in the unwavering light, a beacon of choice in the vast, silent prairie. Ilara's hand, calloused from labor, trembled slightly as she slowly unlatched the heavy wooden bolt on her cabin door. Each click resonated like a drumbeat in the oppressive silence, a prelude to a future yet unwritten. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird seeking release. Every instinct, every ingrained fear screamed at her to stay, to retreat behind the perceived safety of her walls. But something deeper, a quiet defiance born from her own history of being misjudged, of being seen as other, urged her forward. She remembered the accusing eyes of Mrs. Gable, the cold finality of Sheriff Brody's words. She remembered the frightened face of her sister, Lily, witnessing hatred. And now, she saw the silent dignity of these warriors, waiting, judging not with malice, but with a profound ancestral wisdom. This was not a moment for fear, but for truth. With a deep, shuddering breath, Ilara pushed the door open, stepping out of the shadowed confines of her cabin and into the blinding glare of the morning sun. The sharp intake of breath from the surrounding warriors was almost imperceptible, a collective acknowledgement of her decision. She stood on the threshold, vulnerable, exposed, her rifle now resting uselessly by the doorframe. Her gaze met the warrior leader's blanks. His eyes, once unreadable, now held a glimmer of something she dared to call respect, a profound acceptance. Slowly, deliberately, Alara extended her own hand, mirroring his gesture. Her fingers, rough and scarred, brushed against the soft, cool texture of the hawk feather. It was a small, almost insignificant touch, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, a silent bridge built across a chasm of cultural difference and historical mistrust. As her fingers closed around the feather, a collective sigh seemed to ripple through the assembled warriors. There was no cheer, no outward display of triumph, only a subtle relaxation of their stoic postures, a fractional easing of the formidable tension that had held them captive. It was then, as the hawk feather lay nestled in her palm, its delicate barbs tickling her skin, that the warrior leader finally spoke. His voice, guttural yet strangely resonant, carried a cadence she did not understand, yet somehow recognized as a language of profound significance. He pointed not to her cabin, but to the distant, shimmering line of the mountains, then to the rising sun. He spoke a word, a single, resonant word, its meaning lost to her, yet its emotional resonance clear. Asterisk kinship. Asterisk. The word was a metaphor, a revelation, a testament to the unexpected connections forged in the crucible of vulnerability and compassion. A quiet understanding dawned on her. They were not here for plunder or revenge, but for validation, for a shared acknowledgement of life, of a spirit beyond mere survival. The sun, climbing higher, began to paint the distant peaks with strokes of hopeful gold, and a profound sense of release, of hard-won peace, washed over her. The dark, tense, emotional tone of the dawn had shifted, giving way to a quiet, fragile hope, a resolution that was not an ending, but a new, uncertain beginning. The silence that followed was different now, no longer a shroud of dread, but a vast, resonant stillness, filled with the echo of unseen birdsong and the quiet whisper of the wind through the tall grass. The warrior leader, his task seemingly complete, turned with the same fluid grace that marked all his movements. With a silent command, a subtle shift of his weight, the assembled warriors began to move, their horses stirring the dust, their forms melting back into the vastness of the prairie, as swiftly and silently as they had appeared. They left behind only the rising sun, the still cabin, and the small dark obsidian stone glinting innocently in the dust where he had placed it. And in Elara's hand, the hawk feather, a fragile testament to an encounter that had reshaped her understanding of the world and of herself. She stood there for a long time, the warmth of the sun spreading across her face, drying the silent tears she hadn't realized had fallen. The weight of her rifle, once a symbol of her solitude and protection, now felt strangely alien, a relic of a fear that had been challenged, and in part dissolved. The irony of her situation was no longer bitter, but poignant. Her small act of compassion had not invited destruction, but a peculiar, silent understanding, a bridge built between two worlds that society deemed irreconcilable. The open loops of her past, the judgments and betrayals, still existed, but they no longer felt as suffocating. The encounter had forced her to confront her own biases, her own ingrained fears of the other, and in doing so, had offered a glimpse of a different path. The dark, tense atmosphere of the previous hours had truly lifted, replaced by a sense of clarity, a quietude that settled deep within her soul. The resolution was not a grand triumph, but a deeply personal, internal shift. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that her life would never be the same. The wilderness, once a refuge from human judgment, had become a teacher, revealing unexpected depths of connection in its vast, indifferent heart. The hawk feather, now held close to her chest, became a potent symbol of resilience, of unexpected alliances, of the delicate balance between fear and empathy. She would carry it, a silent reminder of the day her kindness had been met, not with an enemy's blade, but with an enigmatic challenge, a test of spirit. Her solitude, once a burden, now felt like a canvas, vast and empty, waiting to be painted with the colors of a life lived with a new, quiet purpose. The future remained uncertain, as it always did on the frontier, but she faced it now with a new sense of grounded hope, a quiet understanding that even in the most desolate places, humanity, in its rawest, most unexpected forms, could still find a way to bloom. The story of the wounded warrior and the woman who gave him water would become a silent legend in her heart, a testament to the profound and often terrifying power of a single, simple act of kindness.